Live from Beit Shemesh and broadcasted around the world, you are listening to the From Entrepreneur Podcast with your host, Nahum Kligman. Interviews and advice from Jewish entrepreneurs from around the world. Listen, learn, be Matzliach.
Welcome to episode 28 of the From Entrepreneur. And today we have Shimon Pepper from Shimon Pepper and Associates. Shimon has dozens of years of experience in the nonprofit and fundraising field. I came through Shimon through my work with NextDor, which is a project I'm involved with Chanan Kaufman from episode 25, where we are looking to help lead the next generation and train the next generation of Jewish entrepreneurs, Jewish social entrepreneurs, I should say. And so I think that this conversation is going to be very enlightening. We're going to learn a lot. And this is somebody that's been out in the field, especially in the fundraising field. If you ever wondered how these organizations are able to raise tens of millions of dollars, not hundreds of millions of dollars, you're going to find those answers out in today's episode. So, Shimon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Nahum. Thank you for having me. And I appreciate the time you give me to share this with your audience.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's really, I've done, I did a little fundraising myself, you know, not compared to the levels you've worked at, but it is not an easy industry to be into.
That is true. In many ways, it's become more complex and more difficult, and I'm sure during the course of our conversation, we can speak about that to some degree. I've actually been involved in the not-for-profit world since 1975. Wow. I began in the federation system and worked in the Jewish Federation system for about 20 years. And over the last 20 years, I have been a consultant working with a variety of organizations under the rubric of Shimon Pepper and Associates.
Amazing. 40 years in the nonprofit. So how did you get into the, actually, before we dig in a little bit, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of where you grew up, you know, what schools you went to, et cetera?
Sure. I was born and raised in a industrial town 50 miles southeast of Boston called Fall River, Massachusetts. It's just east of Providence, between Cape Cod and Newport. I was born in a traditional Jewish family, the oldest of 5 brothers and sisters. My parents had a small retail business. They're in the bakery business. And we lived in Fall River and grew up in Fall River. I went to the public school system in Fall River. And fortunately, some years into our education, we discovered the Providence Hebrew Day School, became a day school student, and later attended Brown University, University of Massachusetts, Hebrew University in Israel, and also studied at a yeshiva, which was then called Shema Yisrael. Later, it became Ohr Somayach and Aish HaTorah, and that is my background.
Amazing. So you were one of the, I guess you were in Shema Yisrael when they first opened up?
Shortly thereafter.
Wow, amazing, amazing. And now you live in Muncie.
That's correct. We've been in Muncie since 1983, got married in the mid-'70s. We lived in Flatbush for a year. I worked for the Federation in Baltimore for 5 years, for 4 years in Houston, and then we settled in Muncie, and we've lived here since 1983.
Wow. So what attracted you, and how'd you get started in the nonprofit world? Is that something that you just, that's something you're always interested in, or did it like find you somehow? I
think I would answer it by saying that it was for me a fusion of a guy who grew up as a 1960s activist and someone who created a greater sense of Jewish responsibility after Yeshiva, and the fusion of the 60 activism and the Jewish commitment led me to the Jewish community pretty much by fate. We moved to New York, and I was seeking a position, and someone invited us for a Shabbos meal. They mentioned something related to the not-for-profit Jewish world. I got first a job at Niana, settling Russian immigrants who were coming to the United States at the time, and thereafter moved to Baltimore and participated in a program that was a fast track in the Jewish communal world. And it really happened over a Shabbos meal when someone heard of the interest that I had and suggested exactly where I should go and how I should proceed. And I actually did that. I might mention that the people that we visited at the time name was Zoroff. They have a son who's famous as a person who is involved in Holocaust studies.
Mm-hmm. So over a Shabbos meal, they realized that, hey, you're an activist, you wanted to get involved in the Jewish world, and they happen to know of a position available.
Education, and I was fast-tracked through a program in Baltimore called the Baltimore Institute of Jewish Communal Service, and came out of that program, worked for the Baltimore Federation, later the Houston Federation, and then National UJA.
So what type of work were you doing for the Federation work?
Well, again, I think that things are very much beshert. I began, and as most Jewish activists at that time assumed that what I was going to become was a social planner. I remember the first project I worked on had something to do with the Jewish Big Brother League. I created a study for them. But shortly thereafter, there was a position open in the Federation field in fundraising. I took that position. I connected to it. I enjoyed it very much. And thank God, Baruch Hashem, I was able to have many, many successful years in the Federation system through just opportunities that presented themselves to me.
And how? So you would basically, how did the fundraising work in those early years?
That's a very good question, because fundraising in the Federation system, in particular in the earliest years, was very much fundraising management. I remember that the first day or two that I began my position, it was in the summertime, I think 1977, and in Baltimore, and I had a whole bunch of what we called prospects that had not yet made their gifts. And I said to my supervisor, he said, "What are you doing today?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to follow up and call these people to try to get donations from them." And he said, "Don't do that." He said, "Because if you do that, they will not take any responsibility anymore. The lay leadership who had responsibility to close these cards, rather call up, have a meeting with your chairman, and make sure he makes the calls." That was the beginning, and that's really how it started. But shortly thereafter, I went on my first mission with young leadership people. One of my first jobs was a director of leadership development in the Baltimore Federation, and there I began to fundraise directly, and I honed in on that skill. And as the years progressed, I became more and more proficient, more and more comfortable, more and more involved, and more successful in the area of direct fundraising. Generally, fundraising for me has meant direct fundraising, 2-on-1, meaning two solicitors soliciting one unit or one prospect.
And back then, you would go to these people's offices, their homes, meet in a restaurant.
All of the above. Again, I think that many of the solicitations in the early days was situational. They took place in Israel. They took place in the back of the bus. They took place in hotels. They took place when we had drinks a few days before the conclusion of a mission that we may have been on. They were really the bulk of the solicitations. Later, it was restaurants. It was breakfasts. It was appointment making, and it evolved, I think, into hundreds and hundreds of very exciting solicitations, each which I always call a human laboratory, never knowing exactly what you're walking into, and having what we call a Jewish conversation that results most of the time in a commitment and a deeper appreciation of the activities and organizations that we are fundraising for, and the results have been over the years and many times astounding. I don't say this in any boastful way, but I believe that fundraising is very much what we would call siyata d'shmaya. It has to do really with the way it's going to end, with the Almighty, with the Kodesh Baruch Hu leading us in some direction. And I think for that reason, there have been many, many, many successes that I would not have otherwise expected.
Amazing. And back then, so again, the Federation would give you the warm leads, or you had to go out and find the leads yourself?
More than leads. The Federation basically had their annual donors or activists. There were very few cold calls, and we worked through a structure. I began with a trade division, the engineering division, moved up to levels of giving, the $1,000 division, the $5,000 division, the young leadership division. And it was, I guess I would call it pretty peaceful fundraising. And those days it was, you gave $1,000 last year. Can I ask you to do $1,500 this year? I might mention that on the first mission, my first really major solicitation, I solicited someone that I had a couple of years of experience with in Baltimore. And the individual I had solicited the night before for, let's say, $5,000. Person had been maybe an $1,800 giver before that. And as we were moving into a caucus, which is where the culmination of a week of fundraising activity took place, and people stood up and announced their gifts and also shared their personal stories, responsibilities, their personal journeys. So I went over to this particular person and I said, $5,000 is a wonderful gift, and I'm really excited that you've gone to that level. Would you consider making a donation of $10,000 during the caucus? And he said, I'll consider that. And the caucus went on, and he was pretty much of a neophyte in fundraising. And when he got up to announce his gift, he didn't give 5 and he didn't give 10, but he gave either 18 or 25. I don't remember exactly what. And those days, men and women had separate caucuses. So he was there with his wife, and his wife came out, and she said to him, Richard, how much more did you give than you said you were going to give? He said, how did you know? And I said, I said to his wife, I said, you knew he was going to give more, and I knew he was going to give more, but he didn't know it until he walked into the meeting. And the energy that took place in that meeting encouraged him and catapult him to a new level. So that's the kind of fundraising that we did very often during the earliest years of fundraising. I was in the Federation system for about 20 years. The last 6 years of those were really blessed years. I was the national director of a campaign called Operation Exodus. It was a campaign to rescue and resettle Russian Jews from the former Soviet Union, bringing most of them to Israel, but some who ended up in the United States or in Germany or wherever they chose to go. And we raised during that period of time $910 million.
Wow.
Including one solicitation, the largest solicitation that I have ever done, which was a $15 million solicitation.
Wow. Do you remember who that was with?
I do. I'd rather not say who it was with, but I am happy to tell the story because it's a very fascinating story. I teach a lot of fundraising, and I take people through the steps of fundraising, set an appointment, visit people face-to-face, 2-on-1 solicitations, a whole series of principles that we go through. And then I say to them, but you never know. Let's go back to this concept of siyata dishmaya. That is, whatever's going to happen is going to be pushed by the Almighty, no matter how prepared you are or what direction you think it's going to take. So this $15 million solicitation happened in all the wrong ways. I was the junior solicitor. There were 2 of us who flew from New York to a Midwestern state, and we solicited a major donor for what was an easy ask. It was a $3 million over 3-year commitment that a very senior person was going to make in response to the fact that we had this opportunity of the doors being opened to the Jewish people in Russia for the first time in 70 years. And it was an easy $3 million ask. That wasn't the solicitation. My job was to then say, we can't reach Mr. So-and-so. Are you prepared to make a phone call and help us close that gift? That was my job. So I said that to this $3 million donor, payable over 3 years. And he said, okay. And he made the phone call. Now, in those days, phones were not so sophisticated. He was on the phone, and I can only imagine how the conversation went based on what we heard. So he called up this person on the West Coast. Our $3 million guy was about 75 years old, and the prospect in the West was about 10 years older. That's important to the story. So he calls up, and he says something like, I'm here with these guys, and they've asked me to call you, as opposed to I just made a commitment, and
right.
and I'm excited about this, and I want you to make a donation. So the conversation went something like this: They want me to ask you for a gift. Now, and person doesn't hang up, and they're having a nice conversation. They know each other, and he says, and to tell you the truth, I myself just made a gift of $3 million. So the person on the other end who doesn't hear that well apparently says, okay, I'll give $5 million.
Wow.
Then he says, I'm giving my $3 million over 3 years. He said, okay, if you want $5 million for 3 years, I'll give you $15 million. And that was the conversation.
Are you kidding me?
That is the conversation.
So he gets up for the phone and says, hey, guys, we just got $5 million for 3 years?
Yeah, you just got $15 million. And sure enough, we got 3 checks, $5 million each check. Now, I told this story many, many times. And It was a Tuesday, and I flew back from the Midwest, and I was the happiest young fundraiser in America. I thought I was just so cool and so great. And it was from my humble beginnings in Fall River, Massachusetts, suddenly I just closed a $15 million gift. It seemed like totally out of this world, which in fact it was. And then, and I told the story, and I said to people, and I was so excited on Tuesday until on Shabbos, on Saturday, I opened the New York Times, and on the front right-hand side in the middle, there was an article about this $15 million donor who had contributed $50 million to the United Negro College Fund.
Oh,
and
my
I said, okay, so I'm not such a big shot. Here he gave $50 million to the United Negro College Fund, and we had this unbelievable
This is a Jewish guy?
A Jewish guy. We had this unbelievable opportunity, and here it is. So I tell this story over and over again, and about a decade ago, about 10 years ago, somebody comes over to me after the lecture that I gave and told this story, and he said, did you get paid? And I said, of course we got paid. We got $5 million each year for 3 years. He said, then you should feel very good because that $50 million was never paid for.
Wow.
So that's now I don't know if that's true or not true, but I'm now once again the happiest fundraiser in America.
That's a great story. Surprisingly, though, you didn't. I would have thought that after you got that phone call, you would have flown to the West Coast just to meet the guy. I mean, he didn't need to meet you. He didn't need anything. He just based on his friend's recommendation?
Yeah, he was not, as I said, he was an elderly man at that time. He was a recalcitrant in many ways. He was not interested in meeting us. In fact, I hadn't actually thought about this for some time, but I was known as the guy who would close this gift. So the next year or so, maybe 6 months later, I went to Israel. I had a meeting with the Minister of Education in Israel or something. We created a program for this particular donor, and I never was able, it was a large program, even larger than $15 million, and I was never able to even present that either to him or to any of his professionals who worked for him. It was a one-time donation. He did not have an interest in pursuing this. We did not create a relationship. Remember, I was the junior guy in this relationship, and I never actually met him. I only met the guy who made the phone call to encourage him to make the gift.
Wow, what a great! I mean, yeah, you just see the siyata d'shmaya in that. That's unbelievable.
100%. So I always say to people, you have the greatest plans, you've done the greatest training, you're a great solicitor, and you may close a gift in a way that you never anticipated or expected, but you have to be out there attempting and trying and encourage yourself to go out and to try to raise money.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so let me ask you a few questions just based on fundraising and the industry.
Sure.
But first of all, who are some of the clients that you work with today? So, I mean, you worked for Federation for 20 years, and then you opened up your own management company.
Yeah, ostensibly what happened was following Operation Exodus, which was a wonderful campaign that went from 1990 to 1995. I felt that the responsibilities and roles that I had at National UJA, at that time I was an associate vice president of UJA, would never really measure up to the tremendous opportunities that I had in fundraising and in community development, and decided that I would branch out, reach out, and do more boutique fundraising. And I began with a number of small clients. And over the years, Baruch Hashem, thank God, I have, by and large, maintained one anchor client at a time. Sometimes it's for a year, sometimes it's for 3 years, sometimes it's for 4 years, and then worked with anywhere from 2 to 4 additional clients throughout the course of a year. if my client system became too large, I brought in some associates. I have a few people who work with me on particular and specific projects, but by and large, my connection is to a client. I help them raise money. I help them problem solve. I've worked with banks in getting mortgages. I've worked with banks in getting reductions and changes in terms, and then help them raise funds. I've taught staff. I've mastered a few new skills, including fundraising on the internet. And by and large, I focus my day on my core client. Today, my anchor client is an organization called Lev LaLev. It sponsors and supports an orphanage in Netanya, Israel, under the auspices of the Klosenberger Rebbe, who started this in 1961. And the rest of my day is spent in a variety of other exciting ways. I'm working today with the Jewish Children's Museum in Crown Heights. I'm working with a couple outreach programs, one in Philadelphia, one in Montreal, and I'm about to begin. Actually, I've just begun a project of purchasing a facility for a startup yeshiva in Teaneck, New Jersey.
Beautiful. Wow. Amazing to be involved in so many great projects and helping the klal in so many different ways. Even though you get paid for it, it's still to be involved in such incredible projects. The schusim are probably endless with what you're doing.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoy what I do. I'm almost at the age of retirement, but there is no reason for me to retire. I'm very excited about getting up and working each and every day. And when an opportunity comes to me and I know I can be helpful, I participate. Generally, it's a paid professional position, but sometimes I volunteer my time, my energy. With all of the years' experience that I have, I believe that it's important that I give back. There's now a project that I'm working on, which I'm very excited about, and I'm doing it pro bono. It's called the Mana Project. Someone here in the States, someone from Kew Garden Hills, originally from Los Angeles, started a project where he has negotiated with Angel's Bakery in Israel and is getting loaves of bread for $1 a loaf. I think it's about a third of the price on the open market. And what he is doing, what he did last year, is he was able to distribute to the poor 1 million loaves of bread. Now he hopes to get up to 2 to 2.5 million with various drop-off points in Israel. And I'm working pro bono at helping him find an executive director and working on his board to make this happen.
Beautiful. Yeah, literally putting bread into the hands of people that just don't have it. That's amazing.
Literally.
Oh, great project, great project. Now, I saw also you worked for the Koby Mandell Foundation?
Yes, I was a founding consultant and fundraiser for the Koby Mandell Foundation in October and November of 2001, about 5 months after Koby was murdered, along with his friend in the about 100 yards behind his house in Tekoa, Israel.
And I still get chills
in a cave. I had a meeting with someone who approached me to represent a particular organization. I was not interested in doing it. And at the end of the meeting, he said to me, as long as you don't want to work for me, I want to recommend and become a shotgun between you and Seth Mandell. And he described the situation. I knew about it a bit. And I told him that I would, that even before I met Seth and even before I created any terms, I would work with the Mandells at setting up this foundation. So I either called Seth or sat with him several weeks later, and I asked two questions. I said, Seth, do you have any prospects? He said, no. I said, Seth, do you have any money? He said, no. I said, okay, I'll take the job. And for 4 or 5 years, until they hired an executive director, and as a matter of fact, I worked with that executive director, Todd Succo, who had started out as a lay leader. And to this day, Todd, who's no longer working for the Koby Mandell Foundation, he and I are close friends, and we've worked closely together over the years on other projects as well. It was a tremendous zchus for me to work with the Mandells at creating that foundation. Foundation started, we went, I guess it was 2001, to the General Assembly of the Federation in Washington, D.C., and I did something that a lot of people always wanted to do, but never really had the opportunity. I I actually raised money at this General Assembly from federations, and we walked out of the General Assembly with a commitment of about $750,000 from
Wow.
4 or 5 or 6 federations that got so excited about this. I won't say they didn't give us the $750,000 at the meetings, but ultimately in the first year we got up to $750,000 of commitments from federations and another few $100,000. And then I remember saying to Seth in May or June, we were ready to start a summer camp. I said, Seth, now that we have a reservoir of $700,000-800,000, I said, what are we going to do with the money? I said, do you have any campers? And he said, and it was June, and he said, no, we don't have any campers yet. And I said, this is crazy. We have the money. We don't have a program. He said, don't worry. In Israel, you don't set summer camps up early. People will come. And sure enough, we ended up with 200 to 250 kids at Camp Koby that summer. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience traveling with Seth, traveling with Sherry Mandell, and working with them in the creation of this foundation.
Beautiful, beautiful. Great story. All right, let's get a little more deeper into into fundraising itself. Now, you've had a lot of experience. What would you say would be the 3 secrets of fundraising?
I'm going to answer that question in a kind of strange way. I actually picked up on a poem that I read in a fundraising book, and then added my own last 5 or 6 verses to it. And I think that'll answer your question in a kind of playful way, and within the context of this poem, I think the answers will be there. So if you bear with me, I will read to you, Perfecting the Ask, the Joy of Asking. A fundraiser stood at the heavenly gate. His face was scarred and old. He stood before Hashem, waiting his fate for his final admission to the fold. What have you done in life? The Malach said, to be admitted here. I've been a fundraiser. That I have been, sir, for many and many a year. Immediately, the gate swung open wide. The Malach rang the bell. Come in and choose your reward, he said. You've had your share of hell. It's necessary to persist, especially in times of economic trouble. Raising funds right now may be tough, so your efforts you must double. Training, it may help somewhat in sharpening your skills, but in the end, the recipe for success depends upon Hashem's will. So solicit face-to-face, make the ask, and be Sameach, happy and very kind. And much success for your efforts you will surely find. Enthusiasm is contagious. It starts with your belief. You'll undermine the bottom line if you emphasize the grief. So present the case with honesty and integrity, and do not ever fake. To force the prospect to make the gift is certainly a mistake. He shouldn't regret what he's done when his slumber he does awake. Believe in it, that is the cause. Believe in you, and believe in the prospect too. He or she will respond in kind. I know, they always do. Oh yes, there are exceptions, but they are counted among the few whose DNA for giving tzedakah is missing from that Jew. So daven, then prepare for the encounter, know as much as you possibly can. Then the potential giver will quickly become the fundraiser's biggest fan. Integrity and passion, I think, answers your question. That is, I think, the tools of success in this particular area. Not convincing someone to do something they don't want to do, but rather giving them the sense that what you're presenting to them is so important, and you're doing so in an honest way with great integrity. Beautiful.
First of all, that poem was excellent. I'm going to write it up. We're going to put it in the show notes. But yeah, you gave us more than 3 secrets, but that was fantastic.
You're talking about preparation. You're talking about 2-on-1 solicitations. You're talking about giving people a sense of purpose, having them share with you a dream, a mission. I always say that I can't write music and I can't draw. So what I like to do with my words is to help a person create an image that becomes their painting. And that is what they are intending to support in their efforts. That's what we hope to achieve. I always say we walk into a solicitation and I have my agenda and he has or she has her agenda, and my objective is to make my agenda our agenda. And that's what fundraising in the classic sense and in the high standard sense is really all about.
Beautiful, beautiful. So what would you say is the most challenging aspects of fundraising, and how do you overcome them personally?
Okay. Clearly the most difficult tasks or the most difficult conditions of fundraising, the most difficult area of fundraising is to, as Nike says, just go out and do it. There are many studies done of people who are in the fundraising area, and many observations I have, and many anecdotes I could share, where the person responsible for fundraising, sometimes the executive director, sometimes even a telemarketer, will choose to do anything and everything except for the fundraising. What I do is I literally spend 3.5 hours each and every morning fundraising, trying to make appointments, trying to respond to calls, setting up appointments. And if you don't set time to do that, you can find tremendous numbers of distractions that you feel are part of the fundraising landscape, but you never quite get the fundraising. So the issue is, the key first ingredient is you have to be in the game. You have to focus on it. You have to think about it. And one of the ways that I do that is the first call that I make in the morning is always an easy call. It's always a call that I know is going to advance what it is that I'm involved in, or at least I think it is. It will set the tone and the day to be a positive day. We fundraisers are deeply emotional, and we're excited about our successes, and we're deeply upset, sometimes depressed, with those that are not yet successful. So I try to build on a positive platform day after day. It generally happens, and the results turn out to be good. Now, that's on sort of a conceptual or philosophical level. On a more practical level, I would say that the three most difficult challenges are getting the appointment, knowing what to ask for, and closing the gift. And I tell you one anecdotal story about knowing how much to ask for, which I think speaks to different question, which are what are the secrets of fundraising? And I think that if you were to say, what are the 3 secrets of fundraising? I would say the 3 secrets of fundraising are listening, listening, and listening. Having said that, I remember once fundraising in Toronto for an organization. I was the, quote, consultant. There was an executive director. The executive director got a meeting with a prominent rabbi in town who then gave us 5 or 6 people for us to visit while we were in Toronto. And the first appointment, and after having conversations with the rabbi, it seemed that most of the solicitations would be in the $1,800 to $2,500 range, which was a perfectly acceptable first donation for people that we had yet to meet, but who could help us in our fundraising efforts. And we went to visit this particular individual who had originally come from South Africa, lived in Toronto, and the conversation went something like this. I know Rabbi so-and-so would not have sent you to visit with me for a donation of $1,800. Now, in fact, that's exactly what we were going to ask. And then he went on, to something else, and we had a conversation. And I looked at him and I said, "Thank you very much." I remember his name. I won't mention it here. And I said, "We'd like to ask you to consider a gift of $18,000. Now, he didn't give $18,000. He gave about $7,500, but he gave us the ammunition, the opportunity, the ability to ask him for a gift that we were not going to ask him for. And that is, by the way, one of the reasons why the 2-on-1 solicitation is so valuable. There are a number of reasons. But in this case, my colleague, who represented the organization, knew the organization better than I, spoke about the organization. But I was able to listen to the cues and to the conversation that this prospect spoke about, and it was very easy then to make the ask and ultimately the closure.
Excellent. That's great. Great advice. What would you say, how important is the follow-up? Like, these guys you meet sometimes, 50 people, 100 people, over the course of your experience, you've probably met thousands of people. How important is the follow-up, and is that important?
Well, follow-up is very important, but recognize that I'm a consultant, come in to help do a campaign for 6 months, 9 months, or a year, and attempt to ensure that the individual who we solicited is returned to the organization. So that's really up to the organization. I do not carry prospects from one organization to another. I find it's not good business. I find it's not ethical. And I find, frankly, that doesn't really work. That once you've built a connection over a particular interest of that individual and have helped to shape excitement from that individual for that organization, it's both unethical and non-productive to move that person to another organization. I would add that I could have far more clients, more than I could handle, if I said to them, oh yeah, I will get you a gift from my friend A or my friend B. I make it very, very clear that we're working from their Rolodex, their connections, and sometimes we'll run into on their list somebody that I know or somebody that I have really the book on, and we'll be able to help them. But by and large, these are not my contacts, and I don't move people from organization to organization. So in answer to your question directly, the organization has to maintain the relationship. I've helped to create the relationship, to advance the relationship, but not year after year. I am not necessarily connected to that particular donor.
Interesting. So, but do you help advise the organizations on how to follow up, how often they should follow up?
Yes.
Why they need to follow up?
Yeah, even after my contract is over, I have sort of a lifetime affinity to the organization, and they might call me back a year or 2 or 3 years later and say, you remember so-and-so, that person is now at a different stage in life. What do you think we should do? Create an endowment, go visit them. Somebody just passed away. How do you best fundraise in a Yeshiva house? The answer is you don't. and so forth. But so I maintain a lot of relationships with people. Most of my new clients come from happy old clients who were happy with the work that I did and then refer situations and people to me, and so I maintain that relationship. I keep those relationships with the client system, but not necessarily with the donors.
Excellent. Okay, so you told us a couple of great stories, successful stories in fundraising. What was the worst fundraising experience that you had? Okay,
I thought about this, and I'm going to kind of reshape the question a little bit by telling you the following story, or the following principle. I often tell people in my seminars that the optimum length of a solicitation and the usual length of a solicitation goes for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. That gives an opportunity to go through the 4 stages of solicitation: the opening, the presentation of the case, the negotiation, and the closing. And the experience that I've had is that between an hour and 15 minutes is the length of a solicitation. And then I caution the people in my seminars that you don't measure the success of a solicitation by the length of that solicitation, and proceed to say, let me tell you that my longest solicitation was 3.5 hours. Maybe it was the second longest solicitation. I could tell you about the longest in a minute. The longest solicitation was 3.5 hours, and I received 0. One of the shortest solicitations was a 14-minute solicitation with somebody who really didn't want me to be there, and he gave $18,000 within 14 minutes. So the length of the solicitation is not necessarily connected to the success of the solicitation. Now, the longest solicitation I was involved in, and maybe it's a fundraising nightmare, maybe it's not, a very good result, was I solicited someone from a foundation or a trustee of a foundation. Mm-hmm. The meeting began in my office at 9 a.m., and I remember that I had a 3 o'clock meeting somewhere else that I had to cancel. So we met from about 9 a.m. to probably 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon. And we agreed early on the level of commitment. In fact, the commitment probably was made before this meeting. It was a $1 million commitment to a project in Israel. The 6 hours was spent on deciding the size of the plaque, the size of the name on the outside of the building. Now, I knew nothing and know nothing about opticals and spacing and that kind of stuff. I was with the president of the institution, who happened to be a PhD in some field related to engineering and eyesight and I'm not sure what. He left after an hour and a half. And I sat for the whole day and pretended and participated and attempted to understand what this person wanted. At the end of the day, I made the person feel really good. The $1 million committed. Several months later, we went to Israel and had a dedication, and everything went well. But it was a very difficult 6 hours for me. Today, I think at my age, I would probably fall asleep. But in those days, I was awake and feigned an interest in what it was that the person was speaking about, although I understood very little.
Great. So let me ask you, I think this is actually a very important question. And I think it's maybe the hardest part of being a fundraiser. First of all, I'm going to make an assumption here that it's harder to get the meeting than it is to close it once you have the meeting.
Absolutely true.
Absolutely true. Okay, so
today that's much more difficult than it was at one time. Again, I want to go back quickly to the UJA days. Everybody knew that they were going to be making their annual gift. The question was, when do we sit down and how much do we ask them for? It was almost automatic and universal that we could get an appointment. Today, that's not necessarily the case.
Right. We're in a different world today with so many people and so many ways to contact people and so many different needs around the world. So how do you from a cold call, from a list, how do you get through? How do you get that appointment?
I've been very confident in everything I've told you to date. I'm going to tell you, since I believe in integrity and honesty, that I am not an expert at getting appointments. I have no better advantage getting appointments than other people. The only
so there's no real secret sauce then.
Well, the only because I have not the I would say I have not the ability to call back with tremendous tenacity. I've really developed two ways of trying to get appointments. One is to do a lot of networking. That is to find someone who's closer to me than the prospect, who can help me put together and find the solicitation. And I'll spend a large amount of time trying to do that. The other is to gain the confidence of somebody inside. It could be the secretary. It could be somebody in the office. Again, in the same genre, the cold call, trying to get an appointment, is a skill that I haven't yet mastered. There are many people who do it, and of course, many people who do it better than I. What I do is, I think the word is network, so that I can find a key and a way in that will allow me to have that conversation with the person and hopefully close their gift.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say soliciting. I mean, that seems to be the hardest part, is how do you get through the noise? And so you're saying by networking, by using your network, getting someone else to make the intro. It's funny, in the for-profit world, that's how it's done as well, where, if you just try to go to an angel investor or a VC without them knowing you, chances are very slim. But if you know somebody that knows them, that'll make the intro. It's a lot easier to get the meeting get noticed.
Yes, I don't have a high level of negativity. That is to say, I feel I can destroy my day by getting a couple turndowns. So I want to work as diligently as I can, as smart as I can, as long as I can, at finding the right way into a situation where I can have some positive results. Fundraising for me is never about how many people you get in touch with. It's really about quality solicitations and quality meetings and quality connections that can lead us to a very high level of success. So it's not about getting 10 appointments, it's about getting 2 of the right appointments. And while that may take some time, I feel that both on an emotional, psychological level and on a practical level, it's the best way for me to proceed at moving a process ahead.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about the economics of fundraising, both back when you worked for the Federation and today. How do fundraisers get paid? Or, I know that some take commission, some don't take any commission. What do you feel? How does it work? And what are your feelings about it?
Well, I'm a very, I'm a professional, and I've never taken a commission. I never will take a commission. I work as lawyers work, as accountants work. I sign on to a project. I get a fee for the project, paid out on a monthly basis. Oftentimes it's adjusted based on circumstances, and that is the way we fundraise. Occasionally there's a bonus connected to it, but by and large, I'm driven by the size of the campaign and the skill sets and the amount of hours. It's not a precise science, but it's never based on commission. I'm so loath to commission because commission it has a bunch of negativities attached to it, including the fact that we are not mashalachim, we are professionals. We're not people knocking at doors. And I don't want the solicitation, the prospect, to feel that he is giving some portion of the money I'm asking for to him. I'm not. I may have a more sustainable contract. I may be more successful with what I'm doing, but there is no direct connection between that $10,000, $50,000, or $100,000 ask and my compensation. And I think that's very important. Again, back to integrity, back to honesty, and back to feeling that I'm doing this as a professional. I'm not doing this for personal gain. It is psychologically, emotionally very important not to get caught up in what is the percentage that I'm going to get from this solicitation. And frankly, it also helps close a gift because from time to time, a donor will ask that question. Not frequently, but from time to time, and is always impressed with the answer that your particular gift has your particular gift will go to the organization and doesn't have, and the success of that gift does not go through me. There's nothing coming out of that gift for me.
Interesting. I mean, that's, you would think that since how hard fundraising is, that having some sort, even if it's a small commission of it, just to motivate you to keep going, to moving, to ask for the larger gift, knowing that there would be some additional financial benefits, you would think that would be a driving force. You're saying most professionals don't take anything above the agreed upon.
Well, I'm not sure about most professionals, but I know I don't, and the people I advise and I work with don't. Now, your point is important. There has to be incentivizing a professional is a good thing, and the way I look at it is really twofold. Number one, I'm driven and motivated by the desire to do a good job and reach the goal. Now, having reached the goal, we oftentimes will build in a bonus. But again, it's not based on a particular solicitation. It's based on the fact that this campaign needed to raise $2 million. It raised $2.1 million, and therefore there's some performance bonus attached to my compensation.
Excellent. And what about how do people overlook or how often does it come up in conversation? Because I know there's something else that you hear a lot of how much money that's fundraising goes to overhead.
Yeah, that comes up all the time.
Right. There's laws about it as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
And I think there's laws about it, at least in America.
Well, I attempt to work for organizations that maximize the return on program and minimize the administrative expenses. Now, it could be a long conversation about how do you determine that, but by and large, my rule of thumb is that for a startup organization, we could sometimes spend or objectify a campaign that might generate 70% program and 30% administration. When an organization becomes more mature, I like to go down to under 20%. So it's also something I work on. And besides fundraising, I'm a community organization professional and a not-for-profit advisor. And I help organizations when they create their 990s work very hard toward an 80-20 split where the vast majority of the money is used for programming.
So 80-20 is acceptable when it comes to foundations and large donors?
Yes, I would say 80-20 is acceptable. Again, I will explain if someone asks me that question that startups must spend more money than that to start up. 30% is acceptable, probably 40 to 45% is not acceptable, but very often the range, it may be that kind of range in the first year or two that a startup, not-for-profit, goes into business. So I work with these numbers, and frankly, I look at them and I discuss them frequently before I take an organization. I want to feel that the organization warrants the respect that I'm going to give it, and therefore I'm going to do my due diligence at looking at the organization to determine what is the organization's best practices.
Excellent. Okay, a young guy, young girl, wants to go out now and become a professional fundraiser. Right, they finish seminar, they finish yeshiva, or they finish college, and they want to go out. They feel they have the skills, they're very personable. What is the path they need to take in order to get involved in this industry?
I first want to answer that by saying that I always encourage people to go into this field. I don't necessarily do that anymore because the rate of success is not necessarily high, and the skill sets are one must be quite skillful and quite lucky, siyata d'shmaya, to be successful. Having said that, I think that what an individual needs is a mentor and a good partnership with a volunteer or lay leader to proceed forward. For example, I'm now working, as I said earlier, on a synagogue, on a yeshiva, which is in a synagogue, in a shul in Teaneck, New Jersey. And my question was to the person who reached out to me, the Rosh Yeshiva, what is your connection and relationship with the president of the organization? Having heard that there was a good partnership, I said, okay, I feel like I can work with you. But if the situation is one of combativeness or difficulty, going into that environment can be counterproductive for me. So I think that there are a couple elements. Does the person have tenacity? Is the person articulate? Is the person egotistical? If the person is too egotistical, then he's not going to be a good fundraiser because, as I always say in my seminars, the most important person in the solicitation is the prospect. It's not the asker. It's not the rabbi. It's not the presenter. It's the prospect. The prospect has to feel good. So if you have those kinds of skills, and I speak very frankly and openly to potential professionals or people who started off in a field but need to climb to the next step, they need a mentor. They need a certain set of skill sets that are really personality traits. They need to be persistent, and they need to be articulate. And they have then the ability and possibility to be successful. And I would add to that, they need to have passion. They need to believe strongly in what they're doing and the future of the Jewish people and making the world a better place, and however they're going to define passion. But it can't be just a job. They will not be successful.
Excellent. Absolutely excellent. This interview so far has been beyond what I could have imagined. Your experience is showing through. It's absolutely excellent. I have a couple more questions, then we're gonna close it off. But in our what we call our lightning round, just two quick questions. One, what was the best advice that you ever received?
The best advice that I ever received was to be yourself, to perfect yourself, to understand yourself, and to use your talents, use your skills in the solicitation process. Not to fake it, but be yourself. I don't remember who gave me that advice, but it kind of evolved. And I always felt that what I had to present, the greatest tool I had was me.
Fantastic. It's great advice. And lastly, what book would you recommend to our listeners and why?
Well, I actually have three thoughts in mind. Number one, the book I would recommend is the book I have yet to write, but it is in my bucket list. So I'm going to recommend the book that no one has read yet that I haven't written. There are two other books that I recommend. there is a consultant, a wonderful consultant, not Jewish, named Gerald Panis, who has written a number of books, two of which I would suggest are his book called Asking, and the other one is called Mega Gifts. There's some wonderful principles in there that are basically consistent with with my experiences and with the principles that I put forth. The other is a Jewish book called Stuck Treasuries by my former Rabbi Avram Chaim Feuer, who now lives in Israel, who put out this book a number of years ago before Hanukkah. And I think that while there are a lot of great stories in the book, and there's a lot of art scroll type interchange, one can read the book from a professional point of view and recognize that Rabbi Feuer is creating a sort of behavior modification concept about fundraising that is incredibly valuable. He says that people are born essentially selfish, and the fundraising process, he's talking about the donations, not the professional piece of this, but I've carried it to the next step. He said the fundraising process turns a person from a selfish to a selfless, from a ego-driven person to a community-driven person. And I think it's a very excellent book that I would recommend. I think it is called Stuck Treasuries by Rabbi Avram Chaim Feuer. And anybody who buys it, I would suggest they call up Rabbi Feuer and say that I'm promoting his book.
Excellent. Okay, Reb Shimon, this has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, I could talk to you for hours. You have so much history, so much knowledge, so much to give. And I appreciate you sharing of your time with us and for sharing your stories and for sharing your advice. This has been absolutely fantastic. So thank you for joining the show.
But thank you very much. You have a wonderful day. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my stories. And I hope in some way it will help others delve into this area, create some skill sets that they haven't had before, and be motivated to be successful. Hatzlacha, Rob. I appreciate it very much, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the From Entrepreneur Podcast with Nahum Kligman. We hope you learned something valuable, and we'll share this with your friends.